intermission time. It's great to get out to the movies.
Do you want to start just an intro of who you are, what you do, how you describe yourself?
Well, I'm Hallie Meyers-Shyer. I directed and wrote Goodrich, starring Michael Keaton and Mila Kunis, which is currently in theaters. I think that's my whole bio at the moment. It's all consuming right now.
This is a question that kind of stumps some people, but if you were to pick a movie that describes your life right now, what would it be?
I feel like the release of a film is a very intense energy. So I'm just trying to think, like, what's a movie that has like nonstop intense energy? I don't know, like, well.
Oh, I was thinking, did you ever see Good Time?
Oh yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like that kind of just like stressful ambiance. Yeah,
right.
That's funny.
I love people that make stressful movies. I was thinking about Uncut Gems, which has nothing to do with my life, but just energy wise. Now that's like where I'm at.
Yeah, same directors as
I know.
Good
That's
Time.
why I thought of it. I'm like, anybody who has some sort of like stressful energy, which is also like a very hard thing to capture on screen, I would say. So I'm very impressed when people can do that because it's manufactured, you know.
Yeah, that is so interesting. Like every single element of a movie has to make it stressful, like the pacing and the music and the actual literal dialogue that's there, every aspect.
Yeah, but like those guys who made those movies and like David O. Russell and people that can kind of create manufactured stress and energy in that way is a very specific thing and really impressive because it's not easy to do because, you know, sets are very contained atmospheres and you're saying action and cut. So like to create that is really challenging. And I think I'm always so impressed when people can do that.
I was trying to think of like sometimes I'll like give what my movie would be, and I was like having a hard time picking one, and the movie that I thought of for mine right now has nothing to do with my life other than Halloween vibe. I just rewatched The Witches of Eastwick the other day, and I'm like trying to elude or bring up like witchy vibe for October, so that's mine.
I'm into that for you. Michelle Pfeiffer in that movie is one of the prettiest people on screen.
Iconic.
Yeah.
Have you been watching any Halloween movies this month, or you been so busy?
I'm also just not a horror person. So I like classic horror films, obviously, like The Shining and obvious ones, but I don't do well with gore at all.
Yeah, valid. I actually wouldn't expect you, well, knowing like your two films, which we'll get into, but I wouldn't expect you to be a horror person.
Yeah. I mean, I like a lot of different genres that aren't the kinds of films that, you know, I've made so far. But horror I love suspense, but I don't love horror. I don't get it. I can't find a way in.
Yeah. It's not for everyone.
Yeah. But you're a big horror person?
No, not big, but I think with doing the podcast, like so many people like horror, especially the community that follow the synagogue for some reason. Like it's just a lot of horror people. So I feel like I've been inching my way in, even though I consider myself such a baby. Like I have a hard time. I'm more of like a thriller person. And this actually segues perfectly. I wanted to hear like what genres you typically gravitate towards.
You know, it's not so much a genre for me as it is just like the film and the filmmaker and story. So I like a lot of genres. I mean, a lot of the genres I like I don't feel like are films that are produced anymore. So, you know, I love a relationship comedy. And that's not a movie that I see anymore in the way I used to like it. So that's sort of dead and gone. Other than Fleabag season 2, which was like the best romantic comedy of all time. And then I like suspense and like a well-written suspense film, like a Hitchcockian kind of film. I don't think that's sort of made anymore. I don't know why I'm being depressing about it. And then
no.
Like also psychological, like kind of like Parallax View, that kind of movie I love.
For the first one, the like romantic comedy that you're describing, like what would be an example of that?
The kinds that I like and I have gravitated towards are the ones that have some drama in them too. So I'm less of like a Notting Hill person, which I love that kind of movie. But for me, the ones I love are more like Hannah and Her Sisters, Manhattan. But, you know, things that have some just that are bittersweet in some way. There's a movie called Heartburn that I love that Nora Ephron wrote, Mike Nichols directed. I love that movie. That's a great kind of relationship study. Broadcast News, that's a good one. That's a classic.
I love Nora Ephron. This is sweet. I'm glad we're talking about this because a lot of the movies you're saying, I don't think we've talked about much on the podcast yet. So that's always fun. I like when our guests kind of broaden the scope of what we talk about.
Yeah, because they're not as cool as, the other people's favorite movies. But I dare you to find a better written movie than Broadcast News.
What role did movies and film take place in your life before working in movies? So like my answer to that would be like my relationship to film has always been like I watch a few movies a week. I don't work in film other than this podcast, so I like go to the movies as often as I can. I would say my relationship to film is like a place where I get inspiration for graphic design because that's what I do. And it's a place where I get music ideas of like what to listen to.
Yeah.
And that's how I describe my relationship to film. How would you describe yours, but prior to making films?
Yeah. So I think it's like a very important thing to a kid to have a thing in life. When you feel like you have a thing, you feel your relationship to yourself is, I think, more empowered and more interesting. And the way you relate to the world becomes more interesting. So film was my thing as a kid. And I carried it with me all the time. I felt I understood it. I felt I loved something very early on. I know, I'm probably much older than you, but I'd go to Blockbuster and my friends would kind of use me as a party trick and be like, ask her anything to the people who worked at Blockbuster, because the people who worked at Blockbuster used to be film buffs.
Yeah.
And that was exciting. And they would sort of like pull out a movie and say, like who starred in the 1939, whatever. And I would know. And it was kind of like a thing for me growing up. So I felt film made me feel that I was cool, even if the outside world didn't feel that way, or in high school I wasn't having that. I felt cool because of film. So my relationship to it was always special. And I felt a connection to this thing. And I never thought I would do anything else. I really just, it was always where it was kind of like my first love. And then, I'm a writer first and foremost. So that was kind of my way into it once I began.
Yeah, that's cool. I did want to ask you that, like, if you had any other career path that you thought you'd be in, because like, obviously we haven't touched on this yet, but you come from a family in the industry.
Yeah.
So it's like is the assumption that you would end up doing that. And that's fun that you had that like special love and connection with film from like the get-go.
Yeah.
Did you always think it would be writing and directing?
I always knew it would be writing. I have a sister who doesn't even like movies. So it's not really an expectation in my household, and it wasn't an obvious thing. When you're really exposed to something growing up, I think you either gravitate towards it or you turn away from it. And my parents saw early on that I had a real interest in it. And I mean early on, like probably around age 7. And they loved it so much, so they were very excited to show me the greats. It's like, I have a kid now, and I can't wait till he can watch a movie. It's actually not even like a movie family thing. It's just a family thing. You get excited to show your favorite movies to your kids in any family. But in my family, those favorite movies are a little bit more cinematic, and they're not just the obvious ones like Back to the Future, which everyone wants to show their sons, For me, it was like they were so excited to show me Preston Sturges movies and Ernst Lubitsch movies. And they just, once I was into it, they were so excited to educate me on the movies that they love. So it was a way to bond with my parents, and I really appreciate the film knowledge I had. We'd be watching something, my dad would pause and be like, "Do you see how he did that? Do you see how the camera moved?" So I really understood a lot about it because they had that unique knowledge of the way films were made.
Do you have like a specific director whose work you find consistently compelling? And what about their filmmaking style do you appreciate most?
It's interesting. I go back to a certain set of classics, honestly, but I do find inspiration in a lot of different places, especially as I find inspiration in different places as a writer and a director. So as a writer, I look at I think the great solid screenplays, which for me that I always return to are The Apartment by Billy Wilder. I think that's sort of like a masterclass. All About Eve. I look at that script a lot because sometimes I like to look at where certain things happen in their scripts because it's structured so beautifully. I will look at their character descriptions. So those are kind of like, it's almost like looking at a textbook for me. Tootsie, that's one that I think is an absolutely perfect screenplay, which is interesting because it was written by a lot of different people, which is very rare that happens. Usually it's one voice that, like Mankiewicz and Wilder and Izzy Diamond. But for me, I don't think it gets more perfect than Tootsie. I also look at Jerry Maguire a lot. I think that is the way that they kind of did comedy and drama is really special and unique. So those are the movies I reference as scripts a lot. Sometimes I'll look at my mom's scripts as well because she has a very unique ability to structure a movie perfectly without ever thinking about it. So people will often say to me, like, oh, did she look at by page 25, I need to be a blank. She's never once concerned herself with that, never even thought about it, but it always happens. Like this is the inciting incident, or this is where, if you look at like those classic structures, she hits them and she has no idea. So I like to look at hers for structure about what around, and I also, because I grew up around her movies, I know them very well. So it's easy for me to think, okay, on what page did Harry get a heart attack in Something's Gotta Give? Like
you
that.
can think of the pages?
No, I'll look to see around what page.
Got it.
I know her movies like the back of my hand, so I will look about when did she make that big moment happen, and like Private Benjamin, I'll be like, okay, what page did Judy Benjamin join the army? Because that's like the moment. But so that's for writing, and then for directing, I look at a lot of Mike Nichols movies. I think he is the best director, which is a bold statement.
I love that.
But I really think he did it best. So I look at his movies a lot. And I look at Woody Allen movies a lot about in terms of blocking. I like the way people are always moving and always talking. So I'll look at his movies a lot. It kind of depends on the genre of what I'm working in. So when I'm working in something, I will look at people who have done that genre great. The next thing I'm writing on right now is a totally different genre. So my references will be really different.
Yeah. Wait, now I'm curious. Can you tell me what genre the next thing will be?
Yeah.
Not public yet?
No, I can. I accidentally talked about it like at the Directors Guild the other night, but then I kind of had a self-reflective moment where I was just like, I don't think anyone cares. So, I kind of got in my head about it. Then I was like, what? Nobody is caring about this. So, yeah, without getting too specific about what it's about, because who knows if it ever happens, but it's like more in the tone of, it's kind of like an intense character study that borders on kind of like suspenseful, like
cool.
Two people who get a little too intertwined in each other's lives.
Cool.
Yeah.
I like that. Fun. That'll be really cool to see like where you take that, just with, it'll be your third film. So it's fun to see that pivot. I was going to ask you, like, are there specific visual styles and like aesthetics in films that you gravitate towards? So like not every director, but their directors, like obviously Wes Anderson has his whole like color palette and his symmetry that he uses, or David Fincher with like gritty realism, Guillermo del Toro, like the fantasy. So obviously like all of them, Baz Luhrmann, Terrence Malick. Do you have like one of those styles, not necessarily that you use, but that you enjoy consuming?
I'm very into color right now and color palettes. So I think it is really interesting the way people weave in. I think it's part of world creation. I'm a big fan of when people do it. I also think it can be overused to the point of taking you out of the realism of the movie. But I love entering anyone's world where I feel I'm actually being guided and in their land. And in all those filmmakers you mentioned, I feel I'm being, there's a Billy Wilder quote that says, grab them by the lapel and never let them go. So I do love the idea of like, all those big directors. I feel a part of their world. And so it's not necessarily a specific style I love. I mean, for me, there are certain looks of films I love. Like I love the way Romero movies look. You know, I so that like all of his films at the, you know, Pauline at the Beach and Claire's Knees, like I love the way those movies look. But there's a DP from that era that is my favorite DP, Nestor Almendros. So I love anything he shot, but I really just enjoy being in another person's world. I think it's a really beautiful thing, and I think it's a huge nod to them when you feel, and it's not always necessarily aesthetic. It's also dialogue. It's all of it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Can you think of the last movie that you saw in theaters and the last movie you watched at home?
Yeah, this is, well, the last movie I saw in theaters was my own, but before that, I hadn't seen a movie in theaters since I saw Barbie and Oppenheimer.
Oh,
And
wow. It was a little chunk.
I know. It was a long time ago, but in my defense, I have a 3-year-old, so it's hard to get to the movies, which is horrible. But, and then the last movie I watched at home was Wolves with Brad Pitt and George Clooney.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
What is it streaming on? Do you remember?
Apple. Yeah.
Apple? Okay. Oh, yeah. I know what you're talking about now. I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I love seeing those two guys. I thought it was, you know, they have a fun back and forth. They're both so talented. I like movie stars. I think so. I enjoy seeing movie stars act like movie stars.
Do you have a favorite performance by an actor you think defines great acting?
Well, there's different brands of acting that are great, and there's different people who were masters of it. So Cary Grant was a master of elegance and confidence in comedy. His performance in almost any movie he was in was masterful. So the way he was, you know, I just saw North by Northwest on the big screen at the Chinese.
Fun.
And that was incredible. He was the something that was so great about it is the way he could weave in comedy in a film that's not comedic. So I think he's one of my all-time favorites. I think Jimmy Stewart in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington is as good as it gets. And I think Nicholson in Cuckoo's Nest is probably, for me, the most you can still watch it and still feel you can take away your current knowledge of him as an actor and see him at that time in that part. And that's really powerful. But there's a million. I mean, I can think of so many to answer that question. Raging Bull, Marlon Brando, you know, I can think of so many. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. It's fun because a lot of the questions that come up on the podcast that I have like queued up for the guests, it's like, of course, there's so many movies and there's so many moments, and it's fun to hear where everyone's head goes and like what's in their back pocket.
And everybody kind of go to classics for that. I mean, it would be just hear about like what defines great acting. I just immediately think of Marlon Brando's speech in the back of the car saying, "I could have been."
No, I love that.
I could have been somebody. Like that's just. But I'm also just like I'm a film lover. So for me,
no, I can tell it's fun.
Classics are less cliche and more they are the classics for a reason, you know, like that performance is beyond belief.
So far in this episode, I haven't like prefaced much that your what your parents do in the industry. So for those listening, a little context. Do you want to give a little context into what your father and mother worked on? And
so my parents are Nancy Meyers and Charles Shyer, and they were a writing and directing team at first. They made movies like Private Benjamin and Irreconcilable Differences and Father of the Bride, Baby Boom, and then they broke up and they made films independently from each other. And my mom made, you know, a lot of romantic comedies like Something's Gotta Give and The Holiday and It's Complicated and The Intern. So yeah, they both are extremely talented writers and directors.
I was looking at your IMDb, and it's so fun that you got to be in a lot of the films.
Yeah.
I saw that you got to be in Father of the Bride, I Love Trouble, Father of Bride Part 2, The Parent Trap, What Women Want, and The Fair of the Necklace. Do you have any like fun moments?
Yeah, I mean, I've been asked a lot recently, like, why'd you stop acting? And I find it so funny because I never was interested in acting for 1 second. My parents just did that as an Easter egg and kind of like a fun thing.
It's
And
cute. Yeah.
me just on set as a kid, I would take some time off school and be in their films. So yeah, I mean, I have memories from all of those sets. Probably my best memory would be in The Parent Trap because I was 10 and they were making a movie about 11-year-old girls. So I was surrounded by kids my age, and it was just a great, fun experience. And Lindsay and I became really close on that movie. And, when your parents make films, that film becomes a family member for a couple of years. So I have really fond memories of all those movies and seeing how hard they work to make those films come to life.
The types of films that your parents both made had a lot to do with like family dynamics and relationships. Did you ever, at the time or even now looking back, see parts of your life in those movies? Like you specifically?
Always. Yeah. I mean, things that would be like the little, stuffed animal that Lindsay's character has in The Parent Trap is called Cuppy, and that was my sister's stuffed animal, and they would copy it and they would send it to props, and props would recreate Cuppy. And so it's impossible not to put your life in your films. I would say all directors do that. They just don't all talk about it. In some ways, those movies are like family photo albums. I mean, as far back as Private Benjamin, they would talk about Aunt Sissy. My mom has an Aunt Sissy. It's all like our lives in a lot of ways, even though it's not necessarily directly taken from our lives. But like Private Benjamin is about a Jewish girl from Philadelphia who joins the army. My mom was a Jewish girl from Philadelphia. The Parent Trap was about an 11-year-old girl when I was an 11-year-old girl. I think a lot of my mom's films, specifically once she broke up with my dad, reflected a lot of what she was going through in her life. So yeah, I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about making personal movies is you put yourself in them.
This was something I was thinking about before this, just because your parents and you're all writer directors. And I was thinking about like the notion of being a writer. And do you think that people who write and like, or their whole like being is around communication, do you think they're good communicators outside of their work?
That's an interesting question. I can't speak for all writers. For me, yeah, I'm a pretty good communicator, but often in any way, I'll be like, I think I should write, if you're in an argument with someone, I would rather write them an email,
That's me. I love writing.
Yeah, I can express myself well through writing. And especially, I think I think Joan Didion said, like, I don't know what I think until I write it down. And I really relate to that as a writer. Sometimes it helps you process.
Before we get into your film, actually, I have a whole nother section I want to add, but I did want to touch on your prior film. This was your directorial debut, Home Again.
Yeah.
That came out in 2017, starring Reese Witherspoon, Michael Sheen, and Candice Bergen.
Yeah.
How did that come about? Where did that story come from?
So that came about because I don't know if I've ever actually said this, but so a friend of mine told me a story once that her mother was Paul Mazursky's daughter. Paul Mazursky's a filmmaker I really, really love. And when Owen Wilson and Luke Wilson and the third brother Wilson, who I would like to call by his name, I think it's Andrew, God bless him for staying away from the limelight, but she was a single mom. She had just broken up with her husband, and they moved in with her and her two daughters. And my friend was one of the daughters, and she remembered these like 3 cute guys living with her and her mom, and that they were filmmakers, and they were here to meet with Jim Brooks and Polly Platt. And Polly Platt had been friends with this family and sort of said, you have a guest house, like let them stay with you. And I think they were maybe working on, I guess they'd already done Bottle Rocket. And I just thought that story had always stuck with me as so interesting, being a single mom, 2 daughters, and these 3 guys move in with you, and that they're so cool. And so that was the inspiration for it. I took it sort of from their lives.
I love that. That's so fun. I would
Yeah.
love to be in that position.
Yeah, me too. There's some like fantasy and wish fulfillment about it, but it actually really happened. So yeah.
Yeah, that's sweet. Now, we are going to have a hot take section before we get into Goodrich. So I'm going to ask you some questions that are like hot takes,
Okay.
and just to get your opinion. Are movie remakes a good or a bad idea?
Depends on the movie that you're remaking. If it's a movie you shouldn't touch, then don't touch it.
Yeah. Do you think practical effects will make a comeback over CGI?
I think they have already. Barbie used a lot. Um, yeah, to some degree.
Are superhero movies overrated or still evolving?
Tricky. I'm not a I don't see them because I can't handle the third act when like the action starts. So I don't know. I think that there's an audience for them. I'm not it.
Is casting big name stars necessary for a film's success?
No, it's not.
Are genre labels limiting for filmmakers and audiences, or do they help categorize films in a meaningful way?
Both. I've experienced on this movie, it's very limiting because my film is a comedy and a drama, and people don't know how to put it in a box.
Mm.
But it's a helpful sales tool. It's just not always true to the actual movie.
Do you think audience reactions and social media buzz have too much influence on a film's success or failure? It made me think of, like, for example, Long Legs or It Ends With Us.
I mean, I think that's a bigger cultural situation that goes beyond film. I just think that there's the line between, art and people has become so blurred, and we have so much information. I do think it's negatively affect your ability to just go cleanly into an opinion of it.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's kind of this next question. Is film criticism dead in the age of social media?
Well, everyone's a critic now.
Yeah.
I don't think it's dead. I think that there is more pressure for snark now than there used to be. There some wonderful writing used to be in film criticism, Pauline Kael and great critics, and there still are. But I definitely think it's getting to be more of a lost art.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, that's the end of my hot takes section. Not too crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're gonna get into Goodrich, and then we'll just have like a little kind of gamey questions at the end, and then we'll wrap. For Goodrich, do you want to give me a brief synopsis of the plot?
Sure. The synopsis is not brief, unfortunately, which is probably why it's an independent
It's okay.
film.
It doesn't need to be brief. No.
It is about a guy played by Michael Keaton, Andy Goodrich, whose wife leaves him in the beginning of the film to go to a 90-day rehab. And she was his younger wife, second wife, and they had 9-year-old twins, and she leaves him alone with those kids. He doesn't really know what to do being a single parent, and he leans a little too heavily on his daughter from his first marriage, who is played by Mila Kunis, and she's pregnant with her first child, and she watches her father become the parent to the second generation that she didn't have, and it's a complicated father-daughter story.
The movie just was released. Well, I guess I don't know when this episode will come out, but it's freshly released.
Yeah, it came out October 18th.
Yeah. I had read an interview you did that you had Michael Keaton in mind for the role the entire time.
Yeah.
What about him, led you to want him to be the lead of this film?
Everything. I think he has a really unique ability to do comedy and drama, and he is one of one. I'm a big fan of Michael's. I think he's sort of incapable of a false move. I think he's a guy who's been very cool on screen for a very long time, so I kind of like the idea of unnerving him a little bit with this situation. And I knew I wanted to create a really flawed character, and I think Michael has this very unique ability to be so adorable and lovable even when showing his flaws, and that was an important part of this character. And I also just really wanted to work with him.
I love that.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite Michael Keaton movie?
Other than Goodrich? Well, I really love all the characters he plays in Multiplicity. I think it's quite an acting feat, and comedy often doesn't get its due. But what he did in that movie is very unique and very difficult to pull off. So right now I'm really feeling Multiplicity, Michael. But there's so many.
Yeah. Yeah, I love someone with a background like his, because there's, like you said, like so many movies to pull from that are all so different. Like
Batman,
you have
Birdman,
yeah,
Beetlejuice,
Spotlight, Beetlejuice.
Spotlight. They could, yeah, he's the best.
And we touched on this a bit, like about film inspiration coming from real life. And this film had moments that ring true to your life. Did you feel at all nervous to like have people in your life see the film and recognize moments or tidbits from it?
I didn't, and I'm not sure what that says about me, but I think, like we've covered, those people in my life have been doing the same thing for their whole life.
Yeah.
So I don't think that they really could. But no, they welcomed the story and understood, the cathartic element of it, and also appreciated how personal it was. And I know I never felt worried about that. I have great relationships with them, so they were okay.
So this is an independent film, and I'm curious to hear the pros and cons from your end of making a film like this. What were like the struggles of the process, but then also like what's the benefit of making this type of film?
Yeah. So the pros of making an independent film is that this is really the film I set out to make. I didn't have to go through a ton of channels of rewrites and notes, and nobody forced me to cast anybody. And this was really how I wanted the movie to look and feel. And I that is not lost on me, because that's really important. And a lot of people in my position who've only made 2 movies, they don't get that opportunity to really have that kind of freedom. So that's the best part about making an independent film. The other best part about making an independent film is nobody's there for the payday. So everybody actually really cares about the movie, wants to be there, wants to be in the movie, wants to tell the story. So I'm always really grateful for that. And I had an incredible team of people working on this movie because they actually wanted to be there. So that's amazing. The hardest part is that you have very little money, and money in movies is important because it's days, and it's not about paychecks. It's about days you can shoot. And we shot this movie in 25 days. And that was extremely challenging, because this is not like we've talked about, horror movie that has, one location and, very few actors or something like that. This was a full-bodied film, a full meal. And I wanted it to feel big, and I wanted it to feel like a $50 million movie. And that, that was the challenge. And if I get to make another film, I really would love to feel what it feels like to be able to have a little bit of time and not have to constantly have all your decisions be ruled by, we got to go, we got to go, we got to go.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
This is a question that I ask basically any like writer director that we have on the show that has a new movie release. What is like a feeling or a takeaway that you want people to leave your movie with?
I don't know. I mean, the fact that this movie is being released in theaters is a really nice feeling for me for this genre, because it's rare. And, you hope that your movie will be received a certain way, but you really can't guess. And now that the movie is out in theaters, I'm noticing that people, they have a good laugh and a good cry in the movie. And I think that's a really powerful thing to do alongside strangers, especially the cry part, because I think that that's not something we get to do. Movies are not meant to be watched alone. They're meant to be watched together. So bringing people together in that way is something I really appreciate. And also, I can only answer that question as I actually know it now, because people have seen the movie, and I know the responses that mean the most to me. And that's when people write me and say, this really resonated with me and made me think about my relationship with my father and things I've wanted to say to my father. And that is a very important thing to me, is how it's made people examine their own relationships.
Yeah, I always think about just the notion of like you put your heart and soul into a project, and then one day it's just up to everyone else to consume and take with what they will, like little nuggets. Yeah. but exciting too. And it's cool, like what you were saying about this being an independent film and that you got to make it exactly how you wanted to make it. That's such a gratifying experience.
It is, for sure. It really is.
Oh, this is something I was curious about. How has your approach to watching films changed since you've started making films?
Well, okay, I have a very specific answer to that. Whatever stage I'm in making the film is what I'm paying attention to in other people's films. So if I'm writing a movie and I'm watching a movie, I'm thinking constantly about, that's an interesting line, or that seemed like, kind of like they didn't need to say that, or that was too obvious, or why did they put that exposition there, or oh, that was smart how they did that device. And so when I'm doing that, then when I'm shooting, I'm constantly looking at the extras and things like that. I'm like, oh god, that guy's walking slowly, or why'd they put the phone on the side of the camera, why didn't they put the phone on the other side? And so I'm just constantly thinking about that. And then when I'm cutting a movie, I'm looking at the editing. And then when I'm scoring a movie, I'm thinking about, I wonder if they thought about why to score that moment that way, or why they didn't use music there. So it depends on the part of the process I'm in. And then a beautiful thing is when I'm done, I just watch it as an audience member and I don't think about anything. And I just watch it like a regular person.
Good. I love that.
Yeah.
I wonder, now that you can just have the experience, like the chapter's a bit closed, right? And so now you can just enjoy yourself potentially.
I have a pet peeve about people who are in film who can only talk about movies like filmmakers. Like, I think it's just
that's funny.
It's obnoxious, and like we're all just like audience members,
Yeah, that it's interesting too, because so I don't work in film. I'm a graphic designer. I just love movies, and we have people that come on the show that, like, I would say majority work in film. The other people on the show are just like movie lovers. Yeah. And I like to hear how everyone approaches like their love for film so differently, because I didn't grow up around people in this industry, so I don't talk about movies like that. So I like to hear how everyone approaches talking about film. I don't want to talk
about movies like that either, because also I was talking to somebody the other day and they were like going really hard on a movie, and I was just thinking, like, it's so friggin' hard to make a movie. Let's give them grace. I wanted to be like, you try it then.
Like, it almost sounds sometimes like people who are like cinephiles. It's like, do you even like movies? It doesn't even.
We're all, as a culture, too hard on it. Like, it's incredibly difficult to make a movie. So, I think that we're all so hard on movies. And a very odd thing about making a film in 2024 is every film that comes out, we have to talk. There has to be a podcast about it, not like yours, but I mean like about the business at large, and everything's at stake every single time. It's the death of the Marvel movie, or is the comedy going to live or die? Like, the stakes are so high for every film that comes out. It prevents you from just being able to make a movie, enjoy it, and see it as what it is sometimes. It's not life or death each time, It is for the filmmaker, but for the audience, movies at large have to be at stake for each coming weekend,
Agreed. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick this or that segment. I'm going to say 2 movies. I think these are, movies, people. And you tell me which one you prefer, I guess. So we have streaming or the movie theater.
Oh, I mean, well, so I don't go to movies very often, but in my head, I'm a romantic, so movie theater.
Clueless or Legally Blonde?
Well, that's a hard one because I love Reese Witherspoon so much, but Clueless is a very seminal film for me.
Old movies or new movies?
Old movies.
Judd Apatow or Richard Curtis?
But both.
The Philadelphia Story or The Apartment?
These are impossible questions. They're both terrific. It's like,
blockbusters or indie films?
I love both. I can't answer these.
Okay, director's cut or theatrical release?
If the theatrical release is how the director wanted it, then I don't know. The director's cut, I guess, is the right answer to that.
Last one is Nora Ephron or Gary Marshall?
I guess Nora, but I don't know. Gary was my dad's first boss, so I have an affinity for him.
Oh, how funny.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to say a genre, and you just tell me the first movie that comes to mind for each genre that I'm going to say.
Okay.
Okay, first, romance.
The Notebook.
Horror.
The Shining.
Comedy.
40-Year-Old Virgin. This is hard.
Documentary.
Martha, which is coming out on Netflix. I really want to see it.
What is it about?
Martha Stewart.
Oh, sick. I will, of course, watch. I watch probably every documentary.
Yeah.
Action.
Action. I'm just like immediately thinking of like a buddy comedy. Jesus, what's an action film? I don't know.
Oh, you know what I would say is like John Wick or something.
Oh,
Do you
yeah.
ever like those?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I can't think of any action films. What does that say about me?
We can pass. Musical.
What's the one with God, I can't think of it. Musical? La La Land?
Animation.
Up?
And finally, fantasy.
Oh, you know what I loved was The Shape of Water. Is that fantasy?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Sweet. Well, I had fun chatting with you.
So much.
And for those listening who want to watch Goodrich, it is in theaters. And anything else to plug?
No, just Goodrich at the moment.
I love it. Okay. Well, thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was really fun.
Now it's time to get lost.
Good evening.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave us 5 stars on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. To stay in touch, follow our Instagram page at It's Intermission Time and share with your friends. As always, Intermission is produced by Jazeel Chu and Olivia Dean, and of course, hosted by yours truly, Megan Braun. This episode is brought to you by The Synagogue.